At last, the silence shattered with the sharp cry of a whistle. Then the bandits came again, harder this time. The doors shook violently under the weight of kicks and shoulders slamming into them. Bullets tore through the shutters. Smoke filled the air as oil-soaked rags, lit with fire, were hurled through cracks and broken windows. Flames licked at the floor, hungry and wild, forcing the townsfolk to stamp them out with desperate feet. The young woman seized the bucket of water and hurled it onto the fire, steam hissing up as the flames died down. Her hands stung from the heat, her chest heaving with effort, but she did not retreat. She met the Apache's eyes across the room, and though he gave no nod, no word, she felt his silent acknowledgement. The fight raged on. The messenger fired again and again, his arm bleeding, his teeth clenched against the pain. The blacksmith roared with each swing of his hammer, defying the bandits with the strength of his blows. The merchant, trembling, passed ammunition to whoever needed it. His fear turned into frantic usefulness. But the walls would not hold forever. The wood splintered under each strike, the barricades groaned, and the flames returned each time a new rag was thrown in. The bandits pressed harder, their shouts growing louder, their laughter more vicious. The young woman's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Each crash against the door felt like it shook her bones, yet she stood her ground, refusing to sink into the shadows. She thought again of her plea, the words she had spoken in desperation. "Don't buy the horse, buy me instead." It had seemed bold, reckless even, but now it felt like more than a gamble. It was a thread binding her fate to this man, to this moment. If she had asked to be chosen, then she must prove herself worthy of that choice, even if it killed her. The Apache's voice cut through the chaos once more, calm but commanding. "They will break through. Be ready." The messenger's eyes hardened, the blacksmith spat onto the floor, and the young woman gripped the edge of a broken chair leg, ready to swing it if the walls gave way. The children's cries below grew louder, mingling with the roar outside, turning the air into a storm of sound. The pounding on the doors grew harder, faster. Wood splintered. Nails shrieked as they tore loose. The barricade shifted inch by inch under the force. The young woman's breath came fast, her chest tight, her knuckles white on the chair leg. She looked once more to the Apache, who stood steady, his knife in hand, his eyes like steel. For the first time since her plea, she saw in his gaze not just acknowledgement but a flicker of something more, something unspoken yet powerful. And then, with a crack like thunder, the door began to give way. The night outside poured in through the broken wood, filled with dust, smoke, and the shadows of men ready to claim everything within. The trading post was no longer just a shelter. It was a battlefield. The young woman's heart screamed with both fear and fire. She knew the moment she had feared and longed for was here. In everything, her plea, her strength. Her fate would be tested in the storm about to burst through those doors. The door crashed inward, wood splitting as the bandits forced their way through, their shouts filling the trading post like the roar of a storm breaking its banks. Smoke and dust swirled as the barricades gave way, and in the chaos, every heart inside the post seemed to beat as one, fast and fierce. The messenger fired into the first man through the door, his shot echoing loud enough to shake the walls. The blacksmith bellowed and swung his hammer, the heavy iron striking down another who tried to climb through the window. Fear turned to fire, and those who had moments before wanted to flee now stood and fought because there was no other choice. The young woman gripped the broken chair leg in her hands, her breath sharp, her body shaking but steady. When a bandit lunged through the gap, she struck with all the strength she had, her blow cracking across his shoulder and driving him back. The weight of the act burned through her arms, but she did not falter. She thought of every road she had walked, every loss she had carried, and she knew that standing here meant more than survival. It was proof that she still had a place in the world. The Apache moved through the chaos with deadly calm. His knife flashed in the dim light, his movements sharp, efficient, each strike measured and true. He was not reckless, but every action spoke of a man who had carried battles before and had learned that strength meant survival. Those who fought beside him felt steadier with him near, as though his stillness steadied them too. The bandits poured in, but the defenders refused to yield. The messenger, bleeding but unbroken, kept firing until his rifle grew hot in his hands. The blacksmith roared with each swing, sweat and smoke covering his face. Even the merchant, trembling and pale through bottles and crates, his fear turned into frantic resistance. The children's cries from below spurred their parents to fight harder, their voices reminding them that surrender would mean more than death. It would mean the end of everything they loved. The battle raged until the air grew thick with smoke and the floor slick with spilled water and dust. The bandits had numbers, but the defenders had resolve, and with every moment, the ground they had thought easy to claim became a wall of fire and iron. The young woman fought with a strength she did not know she carried. Each strike she made, each shout that tore from her throat, seemed to bind her to the moment, to the people beside her, and most of all, to the Apache, whose silent presence never wavered. She felt his eyes on her once, just once amid the chaos, and in that glance she found the strength to swing again, to keep standing no matter how heavy her arms grew. At last, the sound of hooves rose again outside, louder and different from before. The bandits, still pressing inside, paused, confusion flashing across their faces. Shouts came from beyond the walls, not of attack, but of alarm. In the smoke and fire, no one inside understood at first, but the shift in noise carried its own meaning. Another group had arrived, riders from nearby homesteads, who had seen the smoke and heard the echoes of the fight. Their rifles cracked from the darkness outside, and the bandits found themselves caught between two storms. Their laughter and taunts turned to curses and panic as the noose they had cast around the post tightened back on them. The defenders inside pressed harder, their courage flaring at the sound of help. The Apache drove the last man near him back through the broken door, his knife flashing once more. The messenger, his arm bleeding but his will unbroken, shouted for the others to push, and together they drove the intruders out into the night. The battle turned, not slowly but all at once. The bandits, once so sure of victory, scattered under the combined fire of the townsfolk and the homesteaders who had come to their aid. Hooves thundered away into the darkness, shouts fading as they fled into the open land. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breaths of those inside the trading post. The fires were stamped out, the barricades broken, but the walls still stood, and so did those who had fought within them. The young woman sank against the beam, her body trembling from exhaustion, her hands raw and sore. She felt her chest rise and fall in sharp bursts, but inside her burned a light that no fear could put out. She looked across the room at the Apache, who stood still amid the ruin, his face calm, but his eyes carrying the weight of what had been done. Their gazes met once more, and though no words were spoken, she felt the answer she had begged for at the start of the night. He had not bought the horse. He had chosen something far stronger, something that had stood and fought beside him when the night was darkest. The messenger, his wound bound with cloth, lowered himself to the floor, a weary smile breaking through his grit. The blacksmith leaned on his hammer, muttering that iron had done its work well. The merchant sat among broken crates, his face pale, but his eyes alive with the knowledge that he had survived. And from below, the children's cries turned to soft whimpers of relief as mothers whispered promises that it was over, that the storm had passed. Outside, the homesteaders gathered, their rifles slung, their horses snorting in the cool night air. They spoke of pursuit, of hunting the bandits down, but the Apache gave no answer. His silence was its own decision. The bandits had been beaten back, but the land would always hold more storms. The young woman rose slowly, her legs unsteady, but her heart strong. She crossed the floor, stepping over splintered wood and broken glass, until she stood before him once more. Her voice came soft, almost a whisper, but steady. "I told you not to buy the horse. I told you to buy me instead." For a long moment, he said nothing. The firelight flickered across his face, shadows dancing across his steady gaze. At last he spoke, his words quiet but carrying the weight of truth. "You were not for sale. You were already chosen." Her breath caught, her eyes burning with tears she did not try to hide. The night had tested them both, and in the fire of that storm, she had found not only her worth, but her place. The trading post would be rebuilt. The walls would be mended, the windows replaced, the floor scrubbed clean of the marks of battle. But those who had stood within it would never forget the night the bandits came, nor the strength that rose from fear. The messenger would carry his scar as a reminder of courage. The blacksmith would speak of iron turned to steel in more ways than one. Even the merchant would find pride in the moment he had stood instead of running. And the young woman, once alone and desperate, now stood at the side of the man who had seen her not as a bargain, but as something stronger. Together, they looked out at the quiet night. The stars spread wide across the sky, the dust settling back into silence. The storm had passed, but its fire remained. It had bound strangers into something more than survival. It had shown that even in the harshest land, where danger rode fast and fear pressed hard, strength could be found not only in the hand that held a weapon, but in the heart that chose to stand when it mattered most. The young woman lifted her chin, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the first pale light of dawn began to rise. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, that the land would test them again, but she no longer feared the tests to come. She had found her place, her purpose, and the one who had chosen to stand beside her. The Apache stood silent, the morning wind tugging at his hair, his face calm but his presence speaking more than words. Together they watched the dawn break, knowing the night behind them had forged something that could not be broken. The story of the trading post would be told and retold, carried across the plains like the echo of hoofbeats. Yet for the young woman and the lone Apache, the story was not of fear or loss, but of choice, of courage, and of a bond stronger than any storm. And in the quiet that followed, as the first light of day touched the land, the world felt changed not because the danger had gone, but because they had faced it, and in facing it, had become something more than they were before. The noise inside the post grew again as townsfolk rushed to prepare. Some shoved heavy tables against the doors, others fetched buckets of water, and the children were hurried to the cellar. The smell of sweat and fear thickened the air, and outside the last colors of sunset bled into the night. The messenger rider checked his rifle and muttered a curse. "They're closer than I thought." The Apache stepped toward the door, his figure framed in the fading light. He looked out over the land, his eyes narrowing as he studied the dust rising on the horizon. The bandits were coming fast, and soon the question would no longer be whether to fight or flee, but how long the fight could last. The young woman felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak again, to remind him of her plea, to force some answer before the world outside broke through their walls. But her words caught, and she held them, for the moment seemed too heavy to carry more than what already pressed on it. The air quivered with the sound of hooves drawing nearer, each beat louder, sharper, until it seemed to echo in every chest. The Apache's hand shifted once more to the knife at his side, steady and unshaken. The messenger lifted his rifle. The townsfolk braced themselves behind overturned tables and makeshift barricades, and the young woman stood where she had chosen to stand, her heart pounding, her body trembling. Her eyes fixed not on the door but on the man who had yet to answer her. The hooves thundered closer. The dust rose higher. And the night, heavy with danger, pressed in on them all. The night fell heavy, the last glow of sunset swallowed by the rising dust. The thundering of hooves outside rolled across the land like thunder before a storm. Each strike against the earth pulling the people inside the post tighter together. Faces pale, hands trembling, hearts racing, they all knew that what was coming could not be outrun. Some whispered prayers, others cursed, but all waited for the first blow to fall. The Apache stood near the door, tall and silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had seen such nights before, where fear thickened the air until it was almost hard to breathe. His stillness was not calmness alone, but preparation. To those who watched him, he seemed carved of stone, but inside his mind he counted possibilities, weighed choices, and measured the strength of the place and the people within it. He knew they were weak compared to the storm rolling toward them. Yet weakness did not always mean defeat. The young woman watched him from where she stood by the beam, her heart thudding with both dread and stubborn hope. She thought of the words she had spoken not long ago, her plea to be chosen, to be seen as worth more than a horse. Yet now, with danger pressing down on them, that plea felt tangled with something larger. Perhaps she had not only asked for her own life, but had thrown herself into the path of a fate bigger than she understood. The Apache had not given his answer, but the weight in his eyes had told her that she had not been ignored. The messenger, who had ridden and paced the floor, his rifle clutched tight, his jaw set. He glanced toward the Apache more than once, suspicion mixed with something close to respect. The man was not foolish enough to dismiss the knowledge carried in silence. The blacksmith, hammer in hand, muttered about how iron was as good as any blade when swung with anger. The merchant worried over his stock, torn between saving goods or saving lives. And in the corners, women hushed children, holding them close, as though arms could keep out bullets. The sound outside shifted. The hooves slowed, spreading out, circling. Gas! The bandits had arrived, and though they did not yet storm the doors, their presence wrapped the post in a noose of dust and shadow. Laughter rang faintly in the night, cruel and mocking, the sound of men who knew fear had already taken root inside their prey. The Apache's eyes narrowed. He knew this tactic well. Surround, taunt. Let the fear inside weaken the spirit before striking. It was the way of jackals, not wolves, yet jackals killed all the same. A voice rang out from the darkness beyond the walls. Open the doors and lay down what you've got. Do that, and maybe we let you live the night. The words struck through the silence like a knife. Some inside flinched. Others shouted back curses, but most simply stared at the walls, as though looking hard enough could make them stronger. The messenger turned to the crowd. Don't listen. They'll take everything and kill us anyway. We fight or we die on our knees. The blacksmith growled his agreement, lifting his hammer high. A few men muttered their support, gripping whatever weapons they had. Yet others paled, shaking their heads, whispering of running while there was still time. The room split between those who wanted to stand and those who wanted to flee, fear rising like a tide. The young woman felt the divide pressing against her chest. She wanted to shout for unity, to bind them together, but her throat caught, her courage shaken. Hey! Instead, her eyes turned again to the Apache. He did not move, did not speak, yet his presence alone seemed to hold a line against the crumbling. She wondered if he knew how much the people watched him, even when they pretended not to. At last he spoke, his voice low, steady, carrying through the room without force, but with weight.
I am many, you are few.
But fear will kill faster than bullets. The messenger frowned. So you'd have us what? Trust you to lead? The Apache did not answer the challenge directly. His gaze moved across the room, resting for a breath on the young woman before returning to the crowd. Choose now. Run, and you are hunted down like deer. Stay, and you fight like men. The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. To some nodded, gripping their weapons tighter. Others clenched their jaws, torn but unwilling to look weak. The choice, though not fully spoken, had been made for most by the truth in his words. Outside, laughter rose again, closer this time, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle shot into the air. The children whimpered. The women pulled them closer. The men flinched, but held firm. The young woman's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was not a fighter by nature, but something inside her burned now, pushing her to stand taller, even if fear gnawed at her bones. She thought of all she had lost already, the roads behind her marked by hunger, struggle, and loneliness. She would not add surrender to that list. She looked toward the Apache again, silently willing him to see her not as a burden but as someone who could stand beside him if the night demanded it. The bandits began circling louder, their horses' hooves pounding the earth in rhythm, a sound meant to break spirits before the first bullet even struck. Their voices shouted insults, promises of what would come, daring the people inside to break. The post shook with the force of it, and the air inside grew hotter, heavier, as if the very walls pressed closer. The messenger muttered, "They'll strike soon." He checked his rifle again, though the sweat on his brow betrayed his nerves. The blacksmith growled, "Let them, they'll meet iron." The merchant whispered prayers, his eyes darting to the stacked crates, as though wondering if they would serve as cover or coffin. The young woman whispered to herself, words no one else could hear. Not prayers, but promises. She promised not to falter, not to be taken by despair. She promised that no matter what came, she would not vanish into the shadows of the night. The Apache stepped closer to the door, his back straight, his head high. His presence alone seemed to draw the room together, binding their fear into something harder, sharper. He had not spoken much, yet his silence carried more than any speech. The tension thickened, every breath a battle, every heartbeat loud in the chest. The bandits were waiting, the townsfolk were bracing, and the night hung balanced on the edge of what would come. The young woman's eyes never left him. Her plea still hung unanswered, caught between the weight of survival and the storm at the door. But she felt, deep down, that the answer would not come in words alone, but in the fire of what the night demanded. Outside, the circling stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. A breathless pause stretched, thin and sharp, until it cut into the skin. Then came the signal. A whistle sharp as steel sliced through the air, followed by the thunder of hooves breaking toward the post. The first bullet struck the walls. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Screams rose inside, but so did the answering cry of men who had chosen to stand. The fight had come, and there would be no turning back. And in the chaos of that first storm, the young woman caught the Apache's eyes once more, and in them she saw not an answer, but a promise unspoken. Forged in the fire of the night now upon them, the night roared alive with gunfire and the pounding of hooves. The first volley from the bandits rattled the trading post, sending wood chips flying and glass crashing to the floor. Screams rang out, followed by shouts of men bracing themselves for the fight. The townsfolk scrambled to hold the barricades in place, dragging crates and barrels tighter against the doors as the air thickened with smoke and dust. The Apache moved like a shadow through the chaos, his calmness a stark contrast to the panic around him. His knife gleamed faintly in the dim light, though his hand often brushed the rifle leaning by the door. He was watching, listening, weighing every strike against the walls, every cry from outside. To him this was not only a fight, but a test of who among the frightened would rise and who would falter. The young woman pressed herself against the beam, her body trembling as bullets snapped through the shutters and thudded into the walls. Fear clawed at her throat, but something deeper pushed her forward. She could not hide. She would not let herself disappear into the shadows of this night. Gathering courage, she seized a bucket of water meant for fires and dragged it closer to where the others crouched. Her arms shook from the weight, but she forced herself to move, to help, to stand in the storm instead of cowering from it. The messenger crouched by the window, returning fire in sharp bursts, each shot answered by a wild cry from the riders outside. His jaw was tight, sweat glistening on his forehead, yet his aim was steady. The blacksmith swung his hammer at the door whenever it shuddered under the weight of boots and fists, his grunts timed with the pounding wood. The merchant had hidden behind the crates, though his eyes peeked out, wide and darting, torn between fear and the temptation to flee. From outside came the sound of laughter, cruel and taunting. The bandits rode close, firing into the walls, then pulling back to circle again. They were not rushing to break through. They were playing, savoring the fear they stirred inside. Their voices carried threats of what they would do when the walls finally fell, promises meant to rot courage from the inside. The Apache's eyes narrowed. He had seen this before, knew the cruelty of men who found joy in terror. They were not here for trade or simple theft. This was conquest, meant to prove their strength and crush anyone who dared resist. His hand tightened on the knife, but he kept his movements measured. Recklessness would cost lives. The young woman's eyes found him again through the haze of smoke and fear. He had not spoken to her since her desperate plea, but she felt something shift each time his gaze passed over her. He did not see her as the townsfolk did, fragile, foolish, or reckless. He saw her standing, trembling yet refusing to break, and in his silence she found a strange strength of her own. Another shot cracked the window, grazing the messenger's arm and drawing blood. He hissed, but did not falter, pulling back to reload before firing again. The blacksmith growled curses at the men outside, his hammer swinging harder at the door as though daring it to break. The children in the cellar cried softly, their muffled voices twisting through the floorboards, reminding everyone of what was at stake if they failed. The bandits pulled back again, their hooves echoing like thunder across the plain. Then, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The people inside held their breath, every ear straining to catch the next sound. The young woman clutched the beam, her fingers white against the wood. The messenger's eyes flicked toward the Apache, silently asking what came next. "They wait," the Apache said quietly, his voice carrying through the room. "They test how long before fear breaks you." The words chilled those who heard them. Waiting was worse than fighting, for every second stretched long, heavy with dread. The silence outside was not peace. It was a trap, pulling nerves tighter until they snapped. The young woman felt her chest burn with the weight of it. She wanted to shout, to break the silence herself, but her throat locked. She looked instead to the Apache, who stood steady as stone. He seemed carved for this moment, unshaken while the rest of the world trembled. She wondered what storms he had faced before, what scars lay hidden beneath his calm. The sun was sinking low, spilling orange light across the dry land, and the wind carried with it the smell of dust and horses. The trading post sat quiet at the edge of the frontier town, its walls worn by years of windstorms and the shuffle of boots. Wagons lined the yard, some broken down and waiting for repairs, while others carried travelers who had come for barter, trade, or rest. Among the noise of merchants calling their prices and the clinking of coins, one figure stood apart, tall and proud, watching the world with sharp eyes that missed little. He was Apache, his hair long and black, his stance steady, and though he did not speak much, the silence around him carried weight, as if he was a man who listened more than he told. The people at the post gave him space, as they always did. Some looked with suspicion, others with quiet respect, but none dared step too close. His presence was both a reminder and a warning, for he came from a world the settlers could not fully understand. He moved with purpose, his gaze fixed not on the people, but on the horse tied near the corral. It was a strong animal with muscles that shifted like waves under its hide, its dark coat shining even in the dust. The Apache studied it carefully, seeing more than just its beauty. A good horse meant survival, and on the open land where dangers lay hidden, a good horse was worth more than gold. Inside the post, men bargained, women whispered, and children peeked from behind skirts. The noise swelled like a restless tide, yet it quieted when a voice rose above it, carrying desperation and courage all at once. A young woman stepped forward, her hair loose from a long day's labor, her face flushed, but her eyes steady with determination. She was not dressed fine, her clothes marked by work and travel, yet there was a strength about her, the kind that could not be hidden by dust or worn fabric. She saw the Apache, and though others pulled back in unease, she walked closer, as if something in her heart left her no choice. Her voice broke the hum of trade. "Don't buy the horse. Buy me instead," she pleaded, her words bold enough to freeze the room in silence. For a moment, all sound died.
Ow.
The blacksmith stopped hammering, a trader's hand froze in mid-count of coins, and even the restless children hushed. The Apache turned his head slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers, and though his expression did not change, something in the air shifted. She stood in front of him, her breath quick, her hands trembling just slightly at her sides, but her gaze did not falter. The townsfolk began to murmur, whispers moving like a ripple across water. Some thought her foolish, others pitied her, and a few wondered if she had lost her mind. Yet those who knew hardship recognized something in her tone, the sound of someone standing on the edge of no return. The Apache did not speak right away. His eyes searched hers, silent but heavy, as if weighing more than just her words. He had seen many strange bargains in the settlements, but never one like this. She did not lower her gaze, nor did she step back. It was clear her plea was not made for show or drama, but from some truth she carried. The woman's chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her voice. "I'm worth more than that animal," she said, softer now, but no less certain. "I can work. I can fight if I have to. I can be loyal. Horse runs until it tires, but I'll stand as long as you need me to." The silence deepened. Dust drifted through the late light, catching gold in the air. The men at the bar exchanged uneasy glances. The merchant shook his head and muttered under his breath. Now the blacksmith set down his hammer, waiting for the Apache's reply. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, caught between disbelief and curiosity. The Apache finally took a step closer. The wood floor creaked under his moccasins. He stood tall before her, his shadow falling across her face. Yet she did not move away. His eyes flicked toward the horse for a moment, then returned to her, steady and sharp. His silence was not emptiness, it was filled with questions she could feel pressing against her skin. "Why?" His voice came at last, low and measured, as if every word was carved from stone. The woman swallowed hard, but her answer came quickly, almost too quickly, as though she had carried it for longer than today. "Because I have nothing else left to trade, not a coin to my name, not a family to return to. But I won't fade away, not here, not like this. If I am to live, let it be with purpose. If I am to be taken, let it be by choice, not by chance. The room stirred, some gasping softly at her honesty, others shaking their heads as though she had gone mad. Yet no one left, for something in the moment held them. Even the horse outside stamped its hooves as if sensing the weight of the exchange. The Apache studied her again, longer this time, as though looking past her words and into the fire that had driven them out. He saw no lie in her face, no trick in her eyes, only a raw truth that few would dare to speak aloud. For an instant, something unspoken passed between them, a thread of understanding that neither fully grasped, yet both felt, but he did not answer her offer. He only turned his head slightly, his eyes moving over the watching crowd, before returning to her. His silence stretched like a rope drawn tight, ready to snap or hold. The woman's heart pounded, her body tense with fear that he might laugh, or worse, turn away as though her plea had no worth. But the Apache did neither. His face remained unreadable, his stillness a mystery even to those who had seen him before. Outside, the sky deepened into red, the last light fading behind the ridges. The air grew cooler, shadows stretching longer. The trading post stood, caught in that moment, every eye fixed on the unlikely pair. The woman, her voice now only a whisper, repeated her words as though anchoring them into the silence. "Don't buy the horse. Buy me instead." And then, before anyone could breathe, before the Apache gave his reply, the sound of galloping hooves rose from beyond the ridge, fast and urgent. The ground trembled faintly, the sound growing nearer with every beat. All heads turned toward the road, where dust began to rise like smoke. Whatever answer might have been spoken between the woman and the Apache was cut short, the moment breaking under the warning of what was coming. The townsfolk rushed to the windows and doors, their murmurs turning to shouts, while the Apache stood unmoving, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. The young woman's breath caught, her body stiff with both dread and hope, for she knew that whatever thundered toward them would change the course of what had just begun. The hooves grew louder, the dust grew thicker, and the Apache's hand moved slowly to the knife at his side, his gaze never leaving the road as the tension reached its breaking point. Would he accept her plea, or would the storm arriving decide for them both? The sound of hooves grew louder, pounding across the hard ground, sending tremors through the wooden floors of the post. Dust swirled higher in the fading light, and shadows shifted across the open road. Men reached for rifles hanging by the door, women pulled their children close, and a hush fell over the place that was heavier than silence.
8.
The Apache did not move from where he stood. His hand rested near the knife at his side, his body calm but ready. The young woman, still facing him, turned her head toward the road, her breath shallow, her thoughts racing. Whatever storm was riding toward them, it was not one that could be ignored. Out of the haze, the riders came into view. Their outlines blurred in the dust, but as they neared, the shapes grew sharper. Horses strained forward, foam streaking their necks, and the men who rode them were grim and fast, carrying the weight of urgency. The lead rider leaned low over his saddle, urging his mount harder, his face drawn tight in focus. Behind him, 3 others followed, and though they carried no banners, their speed and formation told of trouble that ran deeper than a simple journey. The townsfolk pressed closer to the windows, muttering among themselves. Some thought they might be messengers, others feared bandits, and a few prayed silently that it was neither. The blacksmith cursed under his breath and gripped the hammer still in his hand, his knuckles white. The air inside the post thickened with tension, the kind that makes a person's skin prickle without knowing why. The Apache's eyes narrowed, tracking every movement of the riders. He had seen such arrivals before. Trouble always carried the same look, and these men wore it on their faces as plain as the dust clinging to their coats. He did not speak, but his stillness was its own warning. The young woman felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had only moments ago made her plea a desperate gamble that might cost her everything, and now fate seemed to twist again, bringing yet another unknown into her path. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself not to step back. She had chosen to stand, and she would keep standing, no matter what came down that road. The riders drew up hard at the post, their horses kicking dirt into the air. The lead man dismounted in a rush, his boots striking the ground as he strode toward the door. His face was lined with sweat and dust, his eyes sharp, and his mouth set in a grim line. He pushed through the door without hesitation, his presence filling the room like a storm breaking through a window. "Trouble's coming," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "It's close." A ripple of fear spread across the gathered folk. Some gasped, others muttered questions, but no one dared speak over him. The man looked around the room, his gaze landing briefly on the Apache before moving on. There was no mistaking the flicker of unease in his eyes when they met, but he did not linger on it. He turned instead to the merchant who ran the post. "Bandits," he said, riding hard. 20, maybe more.
Ow!
"They'll be here before night falls.
Best!
You bar the doors and ready yourselves." The words hung heavy in the air, dropping like stones into water. The crowd shifted, voices rising in worry, fear, and hurried plans. Mothers whispered to their children. Men argued about weapons. And the sound of boots thudded against the floor as some rushed to the back to gather what little they had for defense. Through it all, the Apache stood still, his eyes fixed on the rider, his expression unreadable. He had faced bandits before, men who cared for nothing but taking, leaving only ruin behind. He knew well what such men could do to a place unprepared for them. The young woman glanced at him, her heart caught between the weight of her earlier plea and the sudden danger pressing in on them all. She wondered what he thought, whether he would stay to fight or leave them to fend for themselves. Part of her feared he might walk out without another word, but part of her hoped fiercely that he would not. The rider who had spoken wiped his brow with his sleeve, his voice growing sharper. "We've no time for talk. They'll be on us before the moon's high. If you've got steel, keep it close. If you've got courage, you'll need it." The blacksmith nodded grimly, gripping his hammer as though it were a weapon. The merchant stammered, torn between fear and the need to protect his goods. A few men muttered about running, about slipping out the back and leaving the post to its fate, but their words were drowned in the rising clamor. The Apache finally moved. His voice was quiet, but it carried, cutting through the noise with calm certainty. "They come for more than gold." The rider turned toward him, surprise flickering across his face. "What do you know of it?" The Apache's gaze did not waver. "Such men do not ride so hard for coin alone. They want blood, or they want to send a message." The words chilled the air. Some scoffed, unwilling to hear truth, but others fell silent, recognizing the weight of his knowledge. The rider frowned, uneasy, yet he could not deny the sense in it. The young woman's breath caught. His words only deepened the fear in her chest, but at the same time they gave shape to what had been a shadow. She looked at him not as the townsfolk did, with suspicion or distance, but with something closer to belief. He spoke as one who had seen more than most could imagine. The riders who had arrived with the messenger stood by the door, their eyes darting toward the road, hands resting on rifles. The sound of distant hooves carried faintly on the evening air, a drumbeat rolling closer. Time was slipping away, each moment pulling them nearer to the storm. The young woman stepped back slightly, her hand brushing against the rough wood of a support beam, grounding herself. She thought of the plea she had made only moments before, the desperate gamble that still hung unanswered between her and the Apache. With danger bearing down on them, her offer seemed both smaller and larger all at once. Smaller in the face of what might come to destroy them all, larger because survival itself might hinge on choices made in these fleeting moments. The Apache turned his head toward her, just briefly, his eyes meeting hers again. There was no promise in that look, no answer given, but there was recognition. As if he knew that their fates had already begun to intertwine.